dire importance to our children's futures.
More than 1,000 people representing 47 different Capital Region school districts packed into Columbia High School Thursday night to advocate for equitable school funding. The event, organized by Questar 3 and Capital Region BOCES, was entitled Your Schools in Fiscal Peril, Running Out of Time and Options. Education leaders say that unless significant action is taken in this year's state legislative session, local schools will be collectively underfunded. Featured speaker Dr. Rick Timms of the Statewide School Finance Consortium says it's up to legislators to do the right thing and fix the school funding formula.
Money's going to the wrong places at the wrong times. It's not sufficient. It's really a mess. I think we've really got to study it, come up with something that is meaningful, that helps districts most in need.
Superintendent of Schenectady Schools, Larry Spring, says his district is one of those in need. According to Spring, Schenectady has the 13th highest concentration of childhood poverty in the country. He says that urban districts need funding to provide things like mental health services, in addition to the core curriculum.
You know, we're certainly hit hard by the percentage of money that we're entitled to get, that we're actually getting, and that makes it very difficult for us to provide, you know, all of the programming that we should be providing.
School leaders also stress the need for meaningful mandate relief and the elimination of the gap elimination adjustment. Several legislators attended the event and agreed that changes need to be made.
And that's going to be a lot of fair. We're not getting our fair share. Let's start turning the tide the other direction, because it's our kids' future that's at stake.
What we pay for today avoids much larger costs in the future. Education is a great equalizer. It's the empowerment of dreams, and we need to see it as that.
Organizers are already preparing for a second advocacy forum, which will take place on February 11th in Niskayuna.
Good evening. I'm Susan Salvaggio. Good evening. I'm Susan Salvaggio, the Superintendent of Schools at Niskayuna. And on behalf of the Niskayuna Board of Education and our school community, I welcome you to Niskayuna High School. We are here tonight for part 2 of what is an unprecedented regional effort, a call to action. On January 31st, 47 school communities gathered together at Columbia High School to become better informed about the fiscal crisis facing our schools. That event was titled Your Public Schools in Fiscal Peril, Running Out of Time and Options. Tonight's program is about advocacy, and community representatives are here from those same 47 school districts to learn how to best advocate with elected officials on behalf of our schools. I can't imagine a more important reason for us to come together than for our community, our schools, and our children. In addition to those present tonight in the auditorium, we welcome our participants joining us via live video stream. I want to take a moment to thank our Capital Region and Questar 3 BOCES leadership and the communications and BOCES staff that have played a critical role in organizing and setting up tonight's event. Thank you. Despite the challenges ahead of us, as school leaders and community members, I remain hopeful. My hope is based on our capacity to work together to do whatever it takes to ensure the promise of a quality education for our children, now and in the future. On behalf of school leaders across this region, I thank each of you for being a part of tonight's program. Please join me in welcoming 2 of our elected officials who have demonstrated initiative and concern by being present tonight. I would ask that our Assembly representatives please stand and be recognized. Assemblyman Phil Scott. Assemblywoman Dee Dee Vedder. Dee Dee and Phil, we wish each of you the best of luck during your service in the Assembly, and we look forward to working closely with you as you address the dire fiscal situations that our schools face. We look forward to that partnership. January 31st was about why. why schools are facing fiscal peril, and the action needed at the state level to set things right. Tonight is about how, the specific strategies that we as individuals and stakeholder teams can use as important next steps in advocating with elected officials for better solutions for funding and education. As we heard on January 31st, this is a problem that affects districts of every type, rural and urban, as well as suburban districts, like Niskayuna. In our district, just like in yours, we love and are committed to our children. We are proud of their accomplishments, and we want to provide them with the very best education possible. Schools are about people, and at Niskay, we believe in ours. Niskayuna faces a $6 million budget gap for next year, even after years of doing everything that's been suggested and more. We've reduced spending, we've found strategies for efficiencies, we've partnered and shared services, we've spent down our reserves. Despite all of those efforts, we haven't been able to prevent significant budget gaps year after year. Why? The reality is that the decisions we make in our districts will never be enough as long as the state's gap elimination adjustment continues to devastate school budgets. We will revisit this dilemma year after year unless there is meaningful relief from mandates or funding for them. We need action at the state level, and that's why we're here tonight. Citizen advocacy has never been more important. Our youngest citizens need to speak up for them, and now more than ever. Our children will be the next generation of teachers, doctors, engineers, lawyers, state leaders, parents, and citizens. In order for them to achieve their dreams, we have to take action now. We are fortunate to have three people with us tonight who understand better than anyone what is happening at the state level and how to engage policymakers on these critical issues. And I would ask our presenters for this evening to please join me at the podium. Dr. Bob Reedy, Bob Lowry, and Kyle McCullough. All three here from the New York State Council of School Superintendents. Dr. Reedy is the Executive Director of the New York State Council of School Superintendents, a statewide professional association for chief school officers. In his prior service to students, Dr. Reedy served as Chief School Administrator for 32 years in the states of Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and New York. Bob Lowry is the Director of the New York State Council of School Superintendents and has been with the Council since 2002. Bob has worked in school finance and education policy for nearly 25 years. He previously served as a school aid analyst for the State Assembly Ways and Means Committee, Chief Education Aide to Governor Mario Cuomo, and Manager of School Finance and Policy Development for New York State United Teachers. Kyle McCullough is Assistant Director of Government Relations for the New York State Council of School Superintendents. She brings with her years of experience working with the state legislature in both the Senate and Assembly. And prior to joining the council, she represented the Catholic bishops of New York State. In just a few moments, I'm going to turn the program over to Dr. Reedy for brief opening remarks. Following that, we'll hear more from Bob and Kyle about the how-tos and importance of advocacy, along with information about the current landscape and all of this for schools and school funding. Bob and Kyle will be followed by a brief presentation from members of the Capital Region BOCES Communication Service and writers for the blog Education Speaks on incorporating social media into your advocacy plans. We will then ask our presenters to entertain questions from the audience, which will last until about 8:30 p.m. Following questions and answers, we invite you to join us for refreshments provided by the Niskayuna PTO organizations, and also for additional conversation just outside the doors of the auditorium.
Thank you, Susan, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out to this meeting this evening to discuss how we can all continue to make a difference in the lives of not only children today, but for generations to come. Tonight I speak to you not only as Executive Director of the Council, as a former superintendent and teacher, but as a father. One child graduated from Columbia High School, the other from Horseheads High School in New York State, and also as a grandfather. And like all of you, I wonder what the education of our children's children will be in the future. On January 31st, many of us had the opportunity to attend the forum which was held, and we heard some compelling testimony from 4 superintendents: Angela Nagel from East Greenbush, Bob Rand from Skodak, Marie Wiles from Gilderland, and Larry Spring from Schenectady. Each represents very different school districts, but all are facing many of the similar challenges. And all are trying to hold their districts together fiscally in order to preserve as many resources as possible for their children. Angela, Bob, Marie, and Larry outlined extraordinary challenges facing schools in New York State, specifically academic and financial solvency. Many of us in this room vigorously oppose the tax cap law adopted by our legislature and supported by our governor. However, the tax cap is now the law of the land, and none of us believe it's going to go away anytime soon. During the tax cap debate, many proponents of the legislation acknowledged significant mandate relief would have to be forthcoming in order for schools and local governments to continue to provide appropriate opportunities and quality services to their constituents. Alarmingly, more districts are closer to their own fiscal cliff today than ever before. Let me provide you with some data from a recent survey the Council conducted. 52% of the superintendents responding to the survey say that their district's financial condition is worse or significantly worse than it was a year ago. 83 respondents are concerned or very concerned by their district's reliance on one-time resources, reserves for funding ongoing costs. 9% of superintendents say that within 2 years, given the current trends, their districts may become unable to ensure some financial obligations will ever be paid. This would equal 60 school districts. Over 40% anticipate financial insolvency within 4 years. 18% of those responding say within 2 years, given current trends, their districts may become unable to fund all state and federal mandates for instruction and student services. Half foresee reaching that condition within 4 years. But 5%, about 30 school districts, say they are already there, unable to pay for what the law requires. Ladies and gentlemen, these data are staggering. That's why we're here tonight. We must harness our collective voices and be relentless in telling our story. Former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill of Massachusetts, once said, "All politics are local." We must tell our story over and over and over again to lawmakers and state education officials. Let them know what is happening to the opportunities for children in your community. Make it real, make it about your district, and make it about your kids. We need significant changes in the system, including adequate state funding and meaningful mandate relief. And ladies and gentlemen, we need it now. Only our legislative and state educational leaders can change the system. You cannot reduce and or cut your way out of this problem at the local level. The system must be changed. Ladies and gentlemen, tell your story. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Deputy Director of the New York State Council of School Superintendents, Bob Lowry.
Good evening. I am Bob Lowry. We actually have a third Bob who works for the council, 3 men who work for the council, all named Bob. It's one of the reasons I feel at home working there. I'm like the 5th or 6th Bob Lowry in my family. I've always felt that suggests that maybe imagination was not a strength in my hand. But so be it. First of all, thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you for having us. And most especially, thank you for caring out about your schools to be out here tonight. The question, how many of you went to East Greenbush on January 31st? Raise your hands. What we will do today, tonight, is do three things. And as Susan said, the 31st was about the why. Tonight is more about the how. Kyle and we'll talk about the legislative process, how the state legislature works. You've heard both she and I have had inside experience with that. We'll talk some about what is in the state budget, not too much on that, but show you some tools to use and also explain a bit about how the budget process works. And then we'll talk about how to advocate. And I would say, you've heard about some of my background. My career has been divided roughly in half between working on the inside of state government and on the outside. And I believe that the efforts that you're embarking on do make a difference. I've seen it over the years. So I'm really grateful that you're out here tonight.
Thanks, Bob. It's nice to be here with everybody. Senator Cece Chip also joined us, so thank you, Senator, for being here. I have to tell you, I have the best job for three reasons in the world. My first job and most important job is I am a mom to two amazing boys. And you're going to hear their story at the end of our presentation and how the educational experience that they will have will be very different. Now, my second job is I get to be a part-time faculty member at two local colleges, which is great because I get to work with undergraduate students who are so eager about finishing their college education, and then I get to work with up-and-coming school advisors and administrators at the College of St. Rose. And my third job is my most important job. I am a professional advocate, and I advocate every day for all of your children and your grandchildren and your neighbors' children and all of the school children in New York State. And that's just so special. As we said, we're going to talk about three things: the overview of the legislative process, discussion of budget, and Bob's going to talk about that because he's one of the state's finance experts. And then we're going to talk about how to advocate. So let's talk a little bit about the legislative process. First, we'll talk about the where and who. Now, who is, some of them are sitting on this row, so we'll probably pick on them a little bit as we go forward. But where and who? The first step that you're all making is on January 31st. Today is the next step. So you've done the first two things that you need to do, is to learn about the facts. And we're going to talk about those facts as we go forward. Where do I advocate? And as Bob Lowry said, I have to say which Bob because I have two here tonight with me. As Bob Lowry said, where do you advocate? Well, there's different places you can advocate. One is the governor's office. The second is the legislative offices, your senator and your assemblyman, and we'll talk about them, and your assemblywoman. And then the third is your state educational department. So that's the commissioner, your members of the Board of Regents. And again, all of those people are people that you should be speaking with. Now, does anybody remember Schoolhouse Rock? Yeah. So just to have a little bit of fun. This was my favorite thing when I was growing up, because I always thought that the educational process is just this simple.
Well, you sure got to climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. But I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the Capitol City. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee. But I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience.
We all know it's not that easy. So let's just talk a little bit about how the legislative system works, because when you're going to go talk to your members and having a continuing conversation with them, you have to understand how the bill gets introduced, how the budget works a little bit, and what you can do to effectuate and change the process. So briefly, you have 63 members of the Senate, and you have 150 members of the Assembly. The Senate is broken down in an interesting way for this session because we have a majority coalition of independent Democratic members and Republicans that are the majority party in the New York State Senate. Now, your senators are listed here: Neil Breslin, Hugh Farley, Betty Little, Kathleen Marchione, Jim Seward, and thank you for being here, C.C. Kachek. And then, of course, you have your Assembly members. Your Assembly is the lower house, and the Senate is the upper house. So when we tell about who you should be talking to, you should be talking to both your senators and your Assembly member or your member of Assembly. Let's talk about your Assembly members. Dee Dee Barrett, thank you so much for being here. Pat Fahey, Peter Lopez, John McDonald, Steve McLaughlin, Angelo Santabarbara, Phil Steck, thank you so much, Phil, for being here, and Jim Tedesco. You should go to these websites, and I'm going to give you 2 phone numbers that you should all write down if you can. Okay, this is how you get a hold of these fine people sitting in the front row. So if you want to call your Assembly person, call 518-455-4100. Okay, that is the line to the Assembly. And all you have to do is ask for your member's name. If you don't know who that is, you can come to or go right to our website, plug in your address, and it'll tell you who your member of the Assembly is. For the Senate, if you want to call your senator, you should dial 518-455-2800. And that will get you directly to the Senate. So that's the who and the where. Bob, do you want to add anything? Anybody have any questions on this before I go forward? Yes. Oh, sure I will. I'm Irish. I come from an Irish family. Usually I'm really, really loud, so I apologize. So, when do I speak up and what do I say? And this really gets to the meat of the January 31st event and today's event. You have to know what issues to talk about. What does the GEA mean? What does it mean for your district? Dare I say, when do I speak up? You have to do that now. And Bob will tell you why, but we're under a very, very tight time crunch for the budget. And even after budget, members have different ways they can introduce bills. For example, the governor can introduce something that's called a program bill. So any idea that you send the governor's office or he wants to introduce, he will introduce a bill. Your members of the Assembly or Senate can introduce bills at any time. So the when is always. Bob, do you want to talk a little bit about the budget?
Sure. I'll talk some about the budget process and what's in the governor's budget, and also show you something to help you understand and to use in talking to legislators about the budget. A few words about the process. The governor has sort of the power of the first draft. He goes first. Someday she will gets to propose a budget. The date is specified in the state constitution. Usually it falls in mid-January after a new governor is elected. He or again someday she has until February 1st. But that's the first step in the state budget process, the first visible step. And then it's the legislature's turn. And as I said, I had experience working for both the governor and the Assembly. And after first started with the Assembly, and when I went to the governor, I found myself saying when people would come in to lobby me and complain about what we had proposed, sometimes I would say to them, well, the legislature gets the benefit of our experience. And if I really like them and trust them not to get me in trouble, I'd say the legislature gets the benefit of our mistakes. Because the governor works essentially, in secret, developing ideas, hopes to make a big splash when he unveils his budget. But then the legislature gets to hear from all of you, from superintendents, from board members, from teachers, from community leaders, and so forth, pointing out all the problems, or in some cases the strengths of what the governor has proposed. And so that's a pivotal contribution that the legislature makes to the process, and then you can make to the process by educating the people who represent you about what's good and bad in what the governor has proposed. The state fiscal year starts on April 1. We had a long series of years. I think some entire classes of kids were born and graduated from high school without ever having the state adopt a budget on time. But through a series of court decisions and state budget cycles, governors found a way to maximize their leverage And one of the outgrowths of that has been, this movement towards having on-time budgets. Both of Governor Cuomo's first two budgets were on time. This year, because of when religious holidays fall, the legislature's calendar is aiming for passage of the state budget by March 21st. And it could go into the following week, perhaps, but looking to get it done very early. And the message for that is don't wait to weigh in with your representatives. Governor Cuomo's budget. $611 million increase in school aid. I realize most of these numbers are incomprehensible to ordinary people, but that's a 3% increase. $550 million shows up on the school aid one, so that's the part that your district has a sense of what it can expect under the governor's budget. There's some other grant programs. There is a cap now on how much school aid is supposed to grow from year to year. It's tied to the total personal income of state taxpayers. Second, the governor proposes $75 million for these reform initiatives, full-day pre-kindergarten, extended learning time, so forth. There is something unusual this year, $203 million for a financial stabilization fund. And when the governor first came out with his budget back on January 22nd, I will tell you it was painful for us figuring out how do we respond to this. Part of it was because it was in fact better than we anticipated. And so, what I find myself saying is, Mark Twain said, when in doubt, tell the truth. That sounds like very cynical advice until you actually try to apply it. And so what we said was, yes, this is more positive than we anticipated, but we know that it is still going to leave many, many school districts with terrible local budget choices. But this $203 million for a financial stabilization fund was on top of the regular school aid, not yet allocated, so no one knows how much they would get. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Also, the governor proposes some mandated relief options. The most notable one is this optional stable pension rate, allowing school districts to lock in a fixed contribution rate for a period of years. If anybody has questions, I'll try to answer them about that. In terms of individual districts, school aid, school aid is seen as an intimidating, complicated topic. I negotiated school aid for the Assembly for a total of 5 years, and people think, oh, he must be really smart if he could do that. But this year, it's fairly simple understanding what the governor has proposed. Three major moving pieces. Adjusting the gap elimination adjustment, if you were here back on the 31st, Rick Timms, I know, talked about that. It's a mechanism the state uses to reduce school aid in order to close its budget gaps. That's the gap it's referring to. There's also something called high tax aid, which the government proposes to change the formula for that. A handful of districts get more, most districts get less. There's a net reduction. And then there's everything else. Schools get help with paying for transportation and construction, for purchasing BOCES services, for the extra costs of providing special education, as well as general operating aid, and a series of categorical programs. And then again, there's this financial stabilization fund not allocated. And I think that's an example of the government's sort of artfulness at working with the legislature, getting things done. It's not allocated, so with it, he's given the legislature a way to add money to individual districts without adding to the overall size of his budget, without having to raise taxes or cut other programs. And when I worked in the Assembly for the Ways and Means Committee, that was half the job, was figuring out how do we find money in the budget that the governor has proposed or elsewhere in order to pay for the things that we, the Assembly, wanted to add to his budget. And school aid was always one of the items we wanted to add. Here the governor's just given the legislature a pot of money to allocate. We do have a blog on our website, and there's a piece that explains this if anyone is interested. Next I'll show you a tool that you can use to print out something that helps to explain school aid, and that you can show to your representatives. And you go to our website, and up here there's a place where you enter a code number on the website. There's a list, a place where you can find numbers for your district. Type that in, and the numbers will change automatically. And I mentioned about these three moving pieces. One down there at the bottom, the gap elimination adjustment. This is Albany. They, under the government proposal, would get plus $1.7 million. This gap elimination adjustment would be reduced. That's positive. Albany does not get high tax aid, so they're unaffected by that. I live in Bethlehem. My district would lose over $600,000 from the governor's proposed change in high tax. And then there's everything else. And the everything else, the governor doesn't propose any changes to those. If aid goes up or down, it's because the data that is plugged into the school aid formulas change. So, for example, I highlight here charter school transition aid. City of Albany losing almost $2 million. That's not because of what the governor's proposed. That's because of the data that gets plugged into the formula. Likewise with all the other aids except for the GEA adjustment and the and high tax aid if your district gets that. At the bottom of the page, there's this historical piece, and on the left, it shows how aid has changed since 2008-9, and the red number on the bottom says that between 2008-9 and 2012-13, City of Albany has lost a total of $11.4 million, not including building aid. Building aid is reimbursement for construction projects. If you have a big project, you'll get more money there. So this is really more the aid that districts have for operating purposes. And then to the right, there's a table showing how much Albany has lost through this gap elimination adjustment over the years. Any questions about this? And that's what it would look like printed out. It does print out on a single 8.5 by 11 inch page. And you can do this for any district. Okay, I'll turn over to you. Next we'll talk about it. Yep.
When you were talking about the gap elimination aid, on the 31st we were told about the payback into the future, and it would take somewhere around 20 to 25 years. Is that why we're seeing less money taken away each year?
Well, the gap elimination adjustment is a way for the state to sort of calibrate, adjust how much it spends on state aid, or school aid, which is the largest single item in the state's entire general fund budget. So, and there's a cap now on how much school aid is supposed to grow, and so the gap elimination adjustment is the mechanism that the state uses to, again, control the overall size of school aid. And the formula can change from year to year. It's fairly complex. We're a big, complicated state. But, Governor said, we're due to provide a 3% increase in school aid under this growth cap now. We know that, these other aids, building aid, BOCES aid, transportation aid, so forth, those would go up by some amount. He wanted to put $50 million into some grant programs. So I said, that means we've left over a pot of money that we can use to provide additional general aid, and he proposed to do that by reducing the gap elimination adjustment. And what Rick Timms talked about was, at the rate we've been going, it would take X number of years to eliminate the GDA. And, that would vary from district to district. We've had, last year we had an increase in school aid. This year we got an increase in school aid under the governor's proposal. Even with those actions, this current year, 87% of districts in the state are getting less help from state government than they were 4 years ago. With the governor's budget, that number would go down only to 80%. 80% of the districts would still be getting less help from the state than they were 5 years ago. But the GDA is the way the state, the governor and the legislature control the overall size of school aid. Talk a bit about how to advocate. Excuse me. Yeah.
You had, on your previous slides, you said that you can understand the school aid in 3 parts. I didn't follow what those 3 parts were, and you said that it might be explained on the blog.
Yeah.
So you don't need to go into it now, but is there a clear explanation on your...
Yes. I'll try just briefly again. It's the governor proposes to give districts additional aid by reducing the gap elimination adjustment. He proposes changes in a high tax aid formula. Basically, it takes a lot of money out of mostly downstate districts, but a handful of upstate districts. And then the third sort of moving piece is everything else. And with the everything else, the governor doesn't propose any changes. So, you might look at it and say, oh, my district's losing a lot of BOCES aid. That's not because of anything the governor proposed. That's because, maybe your district spent less on BOCES aid and you're getting less reimbursement from the state. So those are the 3 sort of major moving pieces.
So what you're saying is that those are the explanations for the increase?
Yes, increase, in some cases decreases, yeah. The cuts in high tax aid for about a quarter of the districts in the state are greater than what they would get from the governor's reduction in the GDA. So that has a big impact on some districts. Question for you. If you have only one wish, and you can wish for anything, what should you wish for? Any volunteers?
There is a right answer. He told me what it was because I couldn't figure it out.
I'm a transplant in Western New Yorker. I had a superintendent from the Catskills say the Super Bowl won by the Buffalo Bills. And I endorsed that sentiment, but that's not the right answer. The right answer is more wishes. If you can wish for anything, you should ask for more wishes. And why do I bring this up? We hear a lot of criticism about our state legislature. Some of it is deserved. But in my experience, working with people in the Capitol, having worked there myself, I feel sometimes maybe the whole somehow manages to be less than the sum of its parts. And what I mean is, there are a lot of admirable people who work in the Capitol. There are easier ways to make a living than being a state legislator, especially if you don't happen to live in the Capital Region, where you can commute daily. Some legislators have to drive 7 hours or fly to get here. But so there are easier ways to make a living than being a state legislator. And again, I find a lot of admirable people, members and staff. And they may have different motivations. Some want to do wonderful things for their communities. Some may simply like being called senator or whatever. Whatever the motivation, they can't keep doing it unless they keep getting reelected. That's their version of more wishes. And, that's something to bear in mind.
So let's talk a little bit about how you can become a great advocate. I love this first quote. Advocacy is not about salesmanship or crisis intervention. It's about building relationships. And I'm sure our legislators will talk about that. I've spent many years in the Senate and the Assembly working with some fine legislators and staff. And I'll tell you this. It really is about relationships. You should get to know your member. You should invite them to everything that's happening at your school, to all of your football games, and have them come in to read to your kindergarten, and have them send a note with home to them and say, here's our newsletter. I thought you might like to see it, Bill Staff. It's really about how you pick on you sit in the front row. It's really about how do you build that relationship. Paul Tonko, Congressman Tonko, once told a bunch of new superintendents, when you really need a friend, it's too late to make a friend. This is why advocacy for you really has to be your new part-time job. You have to make this a year-round effort, and not just now when schools are in fiscal trouble, but year-round. And again, the only way to be a friend is have a friend is to be a friend. And what does that mean? Let's talk about that. You have so much knowledge about what's happening in your child's life, about what's happening in your school district and community. And your member, either your senator or a member of the assembly, cannot know exactly what's happening in each of their communities all the time. So you have a job to do. It is your job to keep them informed all of the time, every day, every month of your life and your child's life. They should know exactly what's happening in your school. They should know exactly what's happening at Kiwanis or Key Club or at your church organizations. You should know their names. You should know their staff names, because I tell you, I was a staffer for a long, long time. We do most of the work. Wink, wink. So you should get to know them and have this open dialogue with them. So when they need something answered, when they have a question, they should be able to feel comfortable to pick up the phone and call their local superintendent or their local principal or their local mom or dad that's active in the community. So, and really, again, it's not about crisis intervention. Anyone can be an advocate. And anyone can advocate for your kids. And if you don't have children, then you advocate for your neighbor's child. And if your neighbor doesn't have children, then you advocate for your niece and nephew in another district. But it's really, again, about this building of a relationship with your member. This is a great picture, a great quote. I'm as powerful as you think I am.
Actually, that was a quote is from a longtime Brooklyn Democratic boss, not some great writer or whatever. But the idea here is it goes back to this idea of in order to have a friend, you've got to be a friend. And you're in a position to help your representatives do their job better, and hopefully that contributes to whether they get elected, re-elected, or not. How well they're doing their job. And Kyle said, there are ways to provide opportunities for them to be visible, to understand the problems of schools, how state policies affect them. But this idea, the other thing I'd say is, I can recall a conversation with the former superintendent of this district, Briggs McAndrews. After he retired, he did some work for the council, and he was talking to me about advocacy, and he said, Bob, I never knew when I was being a pest, calling my legislator. And I said, Briggs, I think that's absolutely the wrong way to think about this. They work for you. And, when I worked for the first Governor Cuomo, my secretary, and I started working there for a few months, I said, Bob, you're so nice to the people who come in. Why not? I work for them. They pay my salary. And this Governor Cuomo, some of his staff people for a while had pins that said, we work for the people. So, I think that's hopefully the attitude that people in public service take. But, I tell superintendents, and board members and business officials, you have to do what legislators, state policymakers are supposed to do, balance what students need and what taxpayers can afford. And also, you have to take the policies that are enacted for the state, whole state, and figure out how do we make this work in our particular community. And so, again, I think that because you vote for your legislators, you're perhaps leaders in your community influencing how other people think about schools and the impact of state policies, you have a potentially powerful role. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. That's an old adage. What does it mean here? There's really two things. You might have heard the phrase 3 men in a room. I taught a class for some Buffalo public school teachers over the summer, and I asked them, how many of you have heard that phrase? And I was surprised they didn't. It's such a part of our daily lives working in the state legislature. But the idea is that, it's argued that, what rank and file legislators say and do doesn't make a difference. It's the governor, the speaker of the assembly, and the leader of the Senate who make all of the decisions. Not quite true. When I talk to superintendents, I analogize it to collective bargaining. I say, you don't sit down with all 50 or 200 teachers in your school district. You sit down with the leadership and negotiate a contract with them. Same thing with the legislature. Yes, the governor and the staff, negotiate with the speaker and the Senate leader, but the speaker and the Senate leader, they won't stay leaders unless their members continue to support them. And this idea of being squeaky wheels, the more of us, the more of you who are squeaking, saying schools are important, we need action from the state, to your individual legislators. The idea is the more of them will be going to their leaders, the Speaker, the Senate leaders, and saying we need to do something about schools. The other quote there, either you try to make a difference or you make a difference by not trying. It sounds kind of circular and perhaps nonsensical, but there's a very serious point here. You know, whichever side of an argument you're on, that side is stronger if you're speaking up, being vocal. And the story I'd like to tell is, you know, one day a few years ago, the BOCES were doing a lobby day in the Legislative Office Building. It's a 9-story office building. And I'm with one group, and the superintendent asked me, Bob, does this make a difference? And we're walking up and down the stairs in this building. I said, well, Don, why are we walking up and down the stairs in a 9-story office building on a cold day in February? Because everyone else here is doing the same thing. You know, it might be senior citizens, union members, you know, healthcare workers, as well as educators. And if we're not there, if we're not weighing in either in the legislative office building or district offices or, you know, in the news, then the implication is those other people who are doing that must have bigger problems that deserve our attention first. So, you know, it's important to be visible and vocal. And it does, I believe it does make a difference.
To effectuate change. We want our kids to get the best education for this global economy. And we can't do that alone, and neither can you. So don't feel like you're out there talking to your member by themselves. Know that, you know, NICET and NICOM, the Conference of Mayors, you know, BOCES, who's put together these great presentations, the Big 5 school districts, NFIB, the Business Council, AQE, school boards, PTA, everyone is advocating for our children. So if you are not talking to your PTA president, or you're not talking to your school board, or if you are not talking to your local Chamber of Commerce member, if you're not talking to your town mayor or your town supervisor, you should be. Because we all want the same thing. We all want the best education for our children. Maybe for different reasons, but you have a lot of allies out there. And then I don't think we collectively are not tapping into that energy enough. So it's something we all should work out. So you should go to your next Kiwanis meeting or go to your next town board meeting and ask them, hey, will you help us advocate for our kids? And you know what? The answer is going to be yes. So let's talk about your story, Bob.
Yep. Yeah, and we talked about how advocacy is really about building relationships. It's not, you know, crisis intervention. You know, as Kyle said, you know, when you really need a friend, it's too late to make one. But I also think advocacy is about telling stories. You know, that's how we as people make sense of the world. And sometimes, you know, stories that are based on misconceptions take hold and influence big decisions. Working for the Council, a statewide organization, we rely on data, you know, primarily as the sort of foundation for our stories. And Bob Reedy recited from our survey, where, you know, every summer now we ask superintendents across the state a series of questions. This year we added some about insolvency, and the results were impressive. We also do a lot with graphs of school aid data and property tax report card data. And when I try and write for the council, advocating for schools, I try to remind myself to use language that evokes visual images. I tend not to talk about school districts. You know, the budget will be devastating to school districts. A district is a bureaucratic configuration. I try to use schools. The budget will hurt schools. I think it's, you know, that evokes a visual image, and it's a place where learning goes on with kids, and, you know, hopefully that's a positive image for most people. You have something better to work with, though, than just pure data. You have schools, you have kids, you have teachers and teachers' aid and bus drivers who take care of kids, make sure they get home safely. And so that's what you should be using heavily in your stories. You know, and here are some thoughts about, you know, specific points to make.
So good news, I'm going to pick on all of you. Always share your good news. You have members right here. Who's going to stand up? Who's a parent or teacher out there who's going to tell me some good news about their students? I'll start with Bob Libby. Bob Libby, tell me something good about your school district. I'll pick up my numbers, I can.
We have really great things happening with students in the student play, with advanced placement classes, with folks looking for electives for their students. But what's really disturbing is not the good things that are happening, because they're always happening. What's happening now is electives are disappearing. The opportunities for students who need different kinds of opportunities are disappearing. So we need help in generating that kind of opportunity for today's kids, the same that the kids had 5 years ago.
That's a great story. Okay, I know I'm a parent. I drive all the time. Come on, what parents can tell me what great things their child is doing right now in school? Yes?
Our 4th and 5th grade classes that they got grade grades $1,800 2024 in December to send to everything's.
That's amazing. So I'm going to repeat that. Her 4th and 5th grade classes at Ichabod Grade raised $1,800 to help a school that was affected by Hurricane Sandy. Way to go. That's great. Yes.
Our Vern Knox Westerlo cheerleaders, a tiny little school, just completed 24th in the nation for their cheerleading squad.
That's amazing. Vern Knox Westerlo School, a tiny little school, 24th in the nation for their girls cheerleading squad. Congratulations. That's a great report. So share that good news with your members. And when that happens, you know the numbers to call. Right? You know to tell their staff, and you should send them a note and tell them what's happening that's good in your school. You also have to tell them what Bob Libby says, superintendent of schools. What are the tough decisions that are being made? How are things being affected in your school? So tell the good with the bad. They need to know that. They need to know the creative things that your district and your teachers and your principals and your parents are doing to provide more opportunities for your children and your students in these tough times, because that's important too. Because the state's creative on how they do things, we need to be creative, and we are creative, even better than the state. And then you have to describe those really tough choices. You have to talk about the layoffs and the class size. You have to talk about, the cutting of the AP programs and the cutting of the bands and the modified football team, because they need to know what it means to their constituents and their students.
Yeah, and I think you might be thinking, well, we need to go and set up an appointment, meet with our legislators in their offices in the Capitol or the Legislative Office Building. And yes, that's important. And again, the idea is if we don't do that, maybe the presumption becomes the people who are doing that deserve attention first. But I talked about, using words that create visual images. What's a better way to create visual images? Invite your legislators out to your district to see what's going on. Paul Taco was a great friend to the council as a state legislator, and we continue to work with him in Washington. He did, as Kyle mentioned, sessions with new superintendents about advocacy. But one of those, he told about how he went and saw a particular program at one of the school districts that he represented in the assembly, and how it made an impression on him. And he was concerned about how the state budget that he would vote on would affect the district's ability to preserve that program. Telling your story, as we said, talk about the good things that are going on in your district, the tough choices that you've made, creative things you've done to spare students and taxpayers from worse consequences. And also, the choices that you're facing under policies under consideration. And that's part of what we, the council, try to do, is be people who present facts. NYSUP has more, the teachers union has more members than we do by a long shot, so the school board association. But maybe we're in a good position to be the ones who present the facts. You're considering this policy. These are the consequences we can foresee. But you can do that as well with your district. Then you need to say, ask your legislators to support specific actions. And, The BOCES have developed some items, this advocacy toolkit. Your individual district may have specific things, but I would say talk about eliminating the gap elimination adjustment, providing adequate state aid, providing meaningful mandate relief. Governor Cuomo favors some competitive grant programs, and we'd say, no, use that money to provide more aid to school districts now. These grant programs, they won't be allocated until after your school board adopts a budget for consideration by voters. So it's kind of, to me, it's kind of like leaving money on the table for the legislature. Money that could be used to give your school boards and superintendents and ultimately your voters better choices in the budgets that they'll consider and adopt. Finally, I think it's important to ask for something, and not just asking to support particular policy items, but what will you do to help us? And if you're asked, well, what do you want me to do? Well, hopefully you've given that already. We want you to support reducing the GEA. We want you to support this kind of mandate relief. And finally, ask: will you ask the leadership of your party and your house to support what we need? Did you want to say anything about that? Last is a quote that resonates with me. The fool tells me his reasons, the wise man persuades me with my own. To put it in more kind of down-to-earth, contemporary language, I observe people now and then. They'll go and try and talk someone else into doing what they want. It's kind of like, I want you to do what I want because I want it. Well, that doesn't answer the question, why should I do that for you? Why should I, as a decision maker, agree? And that's an important thing to put into words in your interactions with legislators or other policymakers. What is going to be the benefit of what you're asking for? How will it make schools better? Spare the voters from getting upset about what's happening in their schools, and ultimately, perhaps contribute to that legislator being successful in running for re-election.
So besides this probably being one of the funniest movies of all time, so we've all seen this movie, right? I love this picture because it brings up a great point. You're not going to know what's happening in Albany unless you observe, unless you call your member to task, unless you stay in contact with their office, unless you leave your business card or you leave your name and number with them and say, send me updates. You have to observe what's happening in Albany all the time. It's, again, your new part-time job. And if you're not observing and there's no one watching Albany, then Albany's going to try to get away with whatever Albany tries to get away with. So you really have to take an active part in advocacy. And again, you have to watch everything carefully. And I don't have to tell you why. And here's just some reasons why we should all do this. Whether it's for my beautiful children that you're going to see in a minute on the screen, or whether it's your neighbors, or your students, or your niece or your nephew, that's why. They're why. There's nothing more important in our entire society than our children. And whether you're a parent or not, we all should understand that. So that's why we all have to do this. That's why we have to put the effort in. And I'll tell you my why story. These are my whys. And this is why I do my job here at the council. My eldest son, Zachary, is 19 and at the University of Miami. He was a 2011 graduate of Gilderland High School. Are there any Gilderland voters, people here? Thank you so much for giving my child an amazing education. He was graduated 10th in his class of 400. He was a member of the varsity football team, of National Honor Society, of his most important club, Ski Club, of course. He was the president of the Best Buddies. He left Gilderland High School with 28 college credits from all of the AP classes that he was able to take. Again, thank you so much to Gilderland voters, the school board, and the superintendent there for giving my child the education every parent wants their child to have. I got a wonderful phone call every mom dreams of about 3 months ago, and it was his advisor from college telling me that they are allowing him to skip an entire year of college because of all of the college credits he brought into high school. So thank you, Bills and Voters again, for saving my pocketbook. And now the other one is my youngest. Yes, there's a good range, yeah. And that's Jackson. He is 3 and a half. And unfortunately, our school district does not have a pre-K program, so he attends pre-K that we pay for at our local parochial school. But he will attend kindergarten soon in our public school district. Jackson, oh, I can't dare say it, he will be a graduate of the class of 2027. 2011, 2027, what are we doing? And I'm really afraid, like you guys should really be afraid of for your Jacksons. Because my school districts now, through no fault of their own, are cutting almost all of their AP programs. Their class size has gained by 5 and 6 and 7 kids. They have cut their modified sports program. They are cutting their junior varsity program. They laid off 5% of staff. Okay, so, question, is Jackson going to have the same education that Zachary had? No. And is that right? No, and does that make you as angry as it makes me? Yes. Yeah. And there's something wrong with this, because all of our kids should have a great education. And I'm really worried about my Jackson, and you know what, so is Zach. So I said to him, listen, you're going to be my guinea pig tonight in my presentation. And he said, you tell them that I got the best education I could ever expect. And I want that same education for my little brother. So I hope someday we'll work hard enough to get things straightened out so I can promise Jackson and look at Jackson and say, Jackson, you got the best education, just like your brother got. And so that's why. So if you don't have a wise story, you can take mine. Because I love my Jackson just as much as I love my Zachary. And besides, they're absolutely handsome boys. Round of applause for them. But I'll take credit for both of them. You know, so take my story, or take your neighbor's story, and you take other stories.
So we'd be happy to try and answer questions either about, you know, what might be going on with the governor's budget and the policies affecting schools, or about the how-to of advocacy. Questions? Yeah.
I read over the pamphlet, there's a lot of things in there, but it doesn't seem like you're using electronic media like Facebook. All the schools got together in like one page, and that's something that all of us can see. That would probably be a big difference. As people update that, maybe, you know, often enough, then that stuff will go to people. So it would be another voice. It might not be a vocal voice, but it's another way to.
I will tell you that as soon as we are done, both of the BOCES are going to talk to you about a new Facebook launch and social media. So you are absolutely right on target. And hold on 2 minutes, and we'll talk about that.
I was at the 31st meeting, and Dr. Kent's talked specifically about inequities and insufficient funding. He was talking more about the foundation formula, in my opinion, than you guys addressed. I didn't see it on your list. Is that a loss for you? Should we ignore that?
Yeah, there seems to be this foundation formula was a major reform enacted in 2007. A group in New York City sued, challenging the constitutionality of the state's school finance system, and they won after, I think, about 13 years of litigation. And the state, as part of the resolution, adopted some significant school aid reforms, one of which was the so-called foundation formula. It was frozen for 3 out of the last 4 years. There was a small increase last year. I think Rick talked about it in terms of, you know, at the rate we're going, it would take X number of years to get rid of the GEA or to fully fund the foundation formula as was envisioned back in 2007, because the state said We will phase this in over 4 years. And, by one accounting, we're now $5 billion behind schedule. And so that's the sort of thing that Rick talked about. Now, in terms of the impact, reducing the gap elimination adjustment, increasing foundation aid, they're both ways of giving school districts more general purpose aid to, pay basic ongoing costs. And I can argue either one. It's kind of, to me, it's a little bit like arguing over whether you want the money in a brown envelope or a white envelope. I think it's unfortunate that the state, kind of abandoned implementing that foundation formula. It was a significant reform in a number of respects, but, if we increase foundation aid but don't get rid of the gap elimination adjustment, it's kind of like one of the members of our Board of Regents said, we have a formula that giveth and a formula that taketh away. There seems to be a sense among school groups across the state that we should focus on reducing the GEA. That's why I talked about it more. But they're both ways. Increasing foundation aid, that's also a way of providing more general purpose aid to school districts.
When the governor says that he increases state aid by 3%, is that 3% on top of what the gap elimination was, or is that 3% with the gap elimination removed?
He gets to the 3% partly by reducing last year's gap elimination adjustment, by $322 million. So the gap elimination is still there, and it's just small. It would just be smaller under his proposed budget.
I know that you wanted most effective advocacy to be personal stories and individual letters, but sometimes it's hard to motivate all of our families to write letters, and we'd like to make it as simple as possible. How effective or ineffective are form letters or postcards?
I worked in the Capitol for the Assembly and the Governor through 1996, so I left there before we got into email. When I worked there, I'll tell you, postcards we basically said, oh, that's interesting, threw them in the mail. One handwritten letter, I can recall making decisions on smaller issues because we got 5 or 6 individual letters. So that really, I will always argue for, the more personalized stuff. But Kyle, you have a more recent experience.
And I would completely agree. The more personal, the better. But if you're not going to get personal, then a form letter is better than nothing. Try to make that communication. What we do is on our website, you can go on and it says Take Action Now, and it links you right to our Action Network. So we send alerts out to anyone who signs up when important bills are coming so they can email their member. And what we do is we'll have some type of form that has a beginning and an ending, and then the person can type anything they want in the middle. So maybe that's a good combination between a personal letter and a form letter. Send home a form letter to your parents and your community with, here's the things I want you to hit, and if you have time to add in your story, add in your story. But if that's the option, then that's the best option than no option. Yeah. Senator.
I have a suggestion.
Absolutely.
Hi, I wanted to encourage you to invite your legislators to a school board meeting, maybe when the budget comes out, and have your legislator explain to your school and the community what's in the budget, and then invite them back after they pass the budget and tell you what's in it and explain to you what they supported or didn't support, and have them come to you because you do elect them and they work for you. So I would encourage you to have more face-to-face and have those legislators come to your school board meetings, which are televised. So I hope I get invited to all of the school districts in the 46th Senate District. This is one of the reasons I decided to run, is what's happening with public education. And I'm so glad that so many of you are here asking how do we get involved. And I say bring the legislators to your meetings.
Senator Lefebvre used to be a school board member, and When Paul Taco was in the Assembly, he made it a point during this time of year to go and attend a school board meeting in each of, I think it was about 10 school districts that he represented. So that was quite a time commitment on his part. But yes, it's again, I think any of these things that create a personal connection, attach a face, they make a difference. Yes.
And this will be our last question, because then we're going to talk about the new social networking opportunities that we're going to have. Class?
Yep.
I was at a long conference today established by the AQE. We spent a lot of time talking about the CFE money and foundation money, and very little on the GDA money. Obviously, some of this depends on what kind of speech it's on. There's a great number of people from New York City there. There are none from New York City here. And that, it seems to me, is one of the problems. What would you choose to deal with if you had to choose between all of these two issues, the GDA or the CFE money?
Yeah, again, they're both, last year what happened was the Assembly, the houses do one house budgets, and that will give us an indication of how things are going. The Assembly and the Senate will put forward their so-called one house budgets, indicating their priorities. And I believe is to do that. I've heard different dates: March 4th, March 11th, coming up soon. Last year, the Assembly added money for foundation aid. The Senate added money to reducing the GDA. You can guess what happened in the final budget, about half of each. And to me, in terms of an individual district, it's less what it's called than how it's calculated. I don't really, the sense I get is that there's more of an emphasis now around the state on reducing the GDA. So that's why I talk more about that. But again, if we increase foundation aid, that's also a way of providing more general aid to districts.
And we'll be happy to take more questions. We're just going to turn things over.
The other problem with that is that when the court said they had to pay that money based on the decision, they didn't pay it. So when you say they added it, they didn't add anything in the sense that they finally paid some of what they should have paid in 2007.
As I said, you can argue that the state is $5 billion behind on the promises that were made back in 2007 when the foundation form was enacted.
And we'll be happy to take more questions, and we're just going to turn things over to the event organizers to talk about their new media campaign.
Okay, so whoever suggested that we have a Facebook page that everybody can go to and like had a great idea, because that's exactly what we have. This is time for a shameless plug for Education Speaks. I'd like to introduce ourselves. My name is Jill Aurora, and this is Steve King, and we are communications specialists with Capital Region BOCES, and we are also the brains and the brawn behind Education Speaks. I'm probably the brawn.
Depends on the day.
Education Speaks is a blog devoted to thoughtful discussion of the issues shaping public education in New York's greater capital region and beyond.
We started developing Education Speaks about 2 years ago as a place to allow school leaders to speak with greater authority on the issues facing public education, for example, funding, testing, APPR, and more. What we've come up with now is we want to let you know a little bit more tonight about how we're going to be using Ed Speaks as a home base for social media advocacy and a social media advocacy campaign over the next coming months.
I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the old Fabergé Organics commercial with Heather Locklear tossing her long blonde hair saying, "I love it, and I told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends, and so on and so on." And to us, that's the power of social media. We think it can be a great tool for advocacy and helping to get the word out about what's happening in our public schools. Because advocacy is not just talking to your legislators, it's also talking to your neighbors and your friends and letting them know what you think about the issues. So we are starting a New York Schools in Peril social media campaign. Starting this week, we're going to be posting a lot of items on the blog, as well as our Facebook page and Twitter feed that are perfect for sharing with 2 of your friends and 2 of their friends, and so on. Our content will include a weekly advocacy tip, Watch and Learn Wednesday posts, which are going to be videos that are always a very popular share on social media, polls to test your knowledge of school funding in New York State, and plus we'll be continuing all of our regular content. One of the things that we do like to feature is stories from our schools, like Kyle had said before, the good things that are happening in our schools. And we'd love it if you guys would share those with us. If you go to Education Speaks, there's a contact us button and there's an email address on there, and shoot us an email and let us know what's happening, and we can feature you guys on the blog.
Yeah, it's definitely one of our better features that we have on Education Speaks. Last year we ran a similar campaign. We called it Tax Cap Tuesday, and it was really designed to dispel the myths around the tax cap, like the fact that it really isn't a... You're all visitors to Education Speaks. That's great. Actually, that's a great point. In fact, we're going to let you in on the answer to one of our upcoming poll questions. Out of the over 600 school districts in New York State, only 5 of them ended up with a tax levy cap of 2%. So when you see that poll question up in a couple of weeks, you know the answer now. We followed up Tax Cap Tuesday with Mandate Monday, which focused on the many rules and regulations that schools have to follow that cost them money, and how to change those rules, and how they can help schools operate more efficiently and save taxpayer money.
So if you're looking for an easy way to advocate for your schools, be sure to follow us on Twitter at EdSpeaksNewYork. We've got that up there. And we've been using the hashtag New York Schools in Peril for all the content. As a matter of fact, Steve and I have been sitting over there live tweeting everything tonight. So you can go and search New York Schools in Peril on Twitter right now and see a whole listing of all of the tweets that we've sent out tonight, as well as anybody else who's at this event. We have a number of people we've seen who are tweeting tonight. And you can also like us on Facebook. This is our Facebook address up there as well. And since last week's event, our likes on Facebook and our Twitter followers have probably doubled from people who have come to us after the event on the 31st, and we're hoping that that number will greatly increase after tonight.
Yeah, and as Joe was saying, word of mouth is really a powerful tool, and social media makes it easier than ever now. And if you doubt me, I have here in my hand, this is The Warrior, which is the student newspaper here at Niskayuna High School, and I was reading an article earlier this afternoon, and I'll just pull out an excerpt that says, social media sites are the quickest means of spreading news. So if there's breaking news, like Godzilla attacking Japan or something, it's most likely online first with lots of pictures and videos sent in from camera phones. So if we're nothing and we can't learn from our students, there you go. So there's an Education Speaks. We're going to have a lot of information up there in the coming weeks, and we hope you share it out not only on your school districts, Facebook and Twitter pages, but on your own personal pages too. Tell a friend, tell another friend. It'll be worth it.
We also listed up on the screen the Twitter handle and Facebook page of our friends from the council who spoke here tonight. They're always sharing out great information as well, so it's definitely worth it to follow them. And we've also listed a Facebook page run by the Hamilton, Fulton, Montgomery BOCES called Shortchanged in Upstate New York. They are extremely sassy in their critique of state policy, so it's always an interesting read. As Steve said, word of mouth is a powerful tool. Social media makes it easier than ever to tell your friends what you think. So get social and spread the word about New York Schools in Peril. We're now going to take some more questions. So you can ask Steve and I about social media, or if you have questions for Bob and Kyle, that would be great. And we're actually going to send some runners out to the audience with microphones, so hold on a second.
So I see the Facebook page, but I wonder, do the legislators get notified of all the likes and stuff so that they can see how many people are actually contributing to that site?
We can certainly do that. It's not something that we've done before, but that's a great idea, and we'll add it to the list of things that we're going to be doing moving forward. One of the things that we do want to add on there is a social media directory for all of our legislators, so that you guys can interact with them through social media as well.
And if you go online to either the Senate or the Assembly homepages, right next to a member's name, if you click their name, it will tell tell you whether or not they're on either Twitter or Facebook. So you can, follow to watch them, observe them right on Twitter, Facebook, right through either page.
This is actually a fiscal question, and it goes back to Dr. Tim's presentation on January 31st. He commented that there was $250 million in the current year's budget that is currently unallocated because APPR was linked to funding, and for districts that did not meet the APPR deadline of January 17th, that money then became unfundable to them. I've looked around since that meeting and haven't been able to find anything on what the governor's plan is to do with that money for the current fiscal year.
Good question, and I'm not sure I'm not sure myself either. My presumption has been that the state's revenues were coming in behind what was forecast when the budget was adopted. So the state was running a deficit, and by not spending this money, that helps reduce the deficit. That was my presumption.
So the money that was allocated originally for education that's now going to general fund deficit?
It's going to, yes, reduce, that's my belief at this moment. We'll look into that, but that's what I assume was going on.
Thank you. And then just to add that with regards to that money, there's actually a court hearing on Wednesday about that money where there may be a temporary restraining order issued. So I think it's unclear about that money now that the court case has been brought.
Can you just reiterate what the formula was tied to, you said, income in New York State?
Well, the school aid formulas are very complicated, using a variety of factors. Pupil needs, chiefly measured by the percentage of kids qualifying for a free or reduced price lunch, property wealth, income of taxpayers in the school district. But in Governor Cuomo's first year in office, he said he wanted to make school aid more predictable from year to year, restrain the growth, make sure that we didn't have extravagant increases in state aid. So he said, let's cap the growth in school aid at a figure tied to total personal income of New Yorkers. So that's where that comes in. And I don't like that. And there are attorneys who would say that gets in the way of the state meeting its constitutional promise to provide a sound basic education for all children. But there's also somewhat of at least a superficial rationality to it. The largest revenue source for the state is taxes on personal income. The largest expenditure item for the state is school aid. So we'll link growth in one to growth in the other. That's the idea there. But that just controls the overall amount of school aid in terms of how money is distributed to individual districts. That's all these different formulas I showed before, some using many different factors. It's not like there's one school aid formula.
No, I just think it's kind of funny because if we're going to tie that to income, aren't we going to be losing money if we're not going to be able to educate our children to make the money? Just a thought.
As we draw to a close tonight, I think our speakers and our folks from Capital Region BOCES and Cluster 3 BOCES will stay here and answer questions if you have a question that you didn't get to ask. However, I want to say thank you at this time to our three presenters, Bob, and Kyle, to Jill, and to Steve, for their been a member of the council for a little more than a decade. I'm pretty sure that if anyone in this audience had a question that they wanted to send either Kyle or Bob to have answered formally or informally, I thought they would do that, whether it's asked tonight or asked later. And I want to invite you to continue this conversation out in the outer area by the hallways. We have some tables set up, some refreshments. I want to say thank you again to our 8 schools and our PTO council for the refreshments that have been provided tonight to some of our parent groups. And again, to the Capital Region and Western BOCES for the work that's been done for this program tonight. Thank you. We have made history. We have made history on January 31st and tonight. Now let's go out there and make a difference.
Yes,